President Mattarella and President AOUN are now entering the room.
Position, please. Your position.
33,
yes.
51.
And then under.
Okay, 80, 52.
Signori Presidenti,
Presidents, ministers, authorities, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all to MED 2017. RoMED is not a conference. This is a hub, a network of political and economic leaders, exponents of research and civil society coming from 56 countries, a network where everybody presents his or her own vision, comparing it to that of other people who are sometimes very different. It is a comparison, a dialogue, and that's why we call it RoMED Dialogue, whose purpose or whose aim is that of turning issues into policies, into a positive agenda for a world and regions wishing for a better future in terms of shared security and prosperity. This was the objective of the Italian Foreign Ministry and ISPI 3 years ago when we started. The same happened in our 2 previous editions, and more so today, because our program has been enriched with preparatory meetings held yesterday and this morning, plus the 3 days of our actual meeting. All this has been happening because of precise reasons, because of the intention of the foreign policy of the foreign minister and the will of the 51 partner agencies, support and determination of the main exponents of the Italian economic world. This will has been translated into reality by the actors in this opening session who will be there at the closing session in a couple of days. Ambassador Massoni has the floor. President of ISPI, Mr. President Mattarella, Mr. President AOUN, ministers, ambassadors, authorities, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. My list is certainly lacking, but the names that I mentioned certainly indicates what we have been doing during these 2 years. This is the 3rd edition of our initiative. We at ISPI are extremely grateful for having selected this year as main organizers, as smart companions during a process which involves Director Magri, authorities, and the main players in Italian foreign policy, as well as private partners, many Italian and foreign guests. During this period, ISPI has been trying to play its role by attributing consistency, substance, and perspective to an activity which we as a think tank think is essential. A forum where to discuss about the Mediterranean is a forum which tries to provide answers, which tries to represent a forum to exchange ideas about a crucial area in the world, one of the areas that have been defined by people who are much more important than me. If we don't think of that area will think about us and come to us with all its problems, its crises, and its potential threats. MED cannot but acknowledge that in this period the Mediterranean is an area where there are geopolitical challenges and challenges deriving from globalization. We are surrounded by crises, sometimes territorial, local crises, Libya, Syria, the Gulf, and other crises where conflict was hard to manage, and it will probably even be harder what comes after conflict, whatever situation whereby the area becomes volatile and not safe. So a lot of contradictions, flows of people, of money, of weapons, the jihad, the difficulty in finding effective political, economic, or even technological tools to handle these crises. And this makes the atmosphere very unstable. And in this area, there are many global agendas by great and superpowers. And these agendas are sometimes conflicting, and it's hard for them to find, let's say, an harmonious expression. And when this happens, it's just for momentary combinations of interest. However, the Mediterranean is an area full of opportunities, an area where so much of our civilization were born, a place where humanism is not just a word. It's an area where different cultures, different peoples, and young people coexist and are expecting an answer. This area interprets the very essence of Italian foreign policy, which believes that all this wealth should not be wasted. It is necessary to find a place, a point where institutions, civil society, international bodies, business converge to honestly exchange viewpoints. Probably we won't find any easy solution, because easy solutions are often delusional. Simple solutions to difficult problems don't really exist. But if we could only find out the right reasons for peaceful coexistence, well, then we would have really achieved what we are aiming at, and we would have prolonged our ability to keep going in time. And it is with this spirit and with this in mind that we're starting this meeting. And I'm very grateful for your presence, which means your trust and your interest. Thank you very much.
La parola al CEO di ENI, Claudio DESCALZI.
Now, Mr. Claudio DESCALZI, ENI CEO. Mr. President of the Republic, Sergio Mattarella, Mr. President Michel, AOUN, ministers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. As Ambassador MASSOLO just said, this is an extraordinary opportunity, which is now part of our institutional calendar. And today, more than ever, it is an important occasion because we are on a very, very bumpy road. Scenarios are changing, and this region, which is very unique, the northern and southern parts of the Mediterranean, is characterized by great volatility and numerous crises. The Mediterranean region, which comprises about 500 million inhabitants, accounts for 7% of the world population. It produces over 10% of the world GDP, more or less close to that of China. At the time, however, this area is characterized by a huge gap between the north and the south. The north is wealthier, even though in the last few years has recorded low economic growth. It's now somehow recovering in a stationary fashion. However, the economic cycle has improved, even though long-term growth will be below 3%. The South has a GDP which is 7 times lower than that of the North, but its development potential is much greater because it has many resources. If we exclude the areas of conflict, Libya and Syria, in this region, economic growth is consistently higher than 3%. And that's where 45% of the population lives. In the next 10 years, population will increase by 20% in the southern part of the Mediterranean. So there's a gap. There's a gap between the north and the south. It is an economic gap, which broadens if we think about the social issues. If we think of Africa as a whole, what does this mean? This means underdevelopment, hunger, and lack of primary goods, hence conflicts. Therefore, this gap should be filled and monitored very closely. All this was exacerbated by worldwide crisis. Therefore, not only is there a local crisis, but there's a world crisis, which in the last 3 years has led to drop in investments, sometimes to the absence of investments in the southern part of the Mediterranean, also because most of these investments were linked to energy. Therefore, this crisis had two different kinds of effects and has harshened tensions and worsened migratory phenomena. Migration has particularly concerned the central part of the Mediterranean, and in 2013, about 650,000 migrants landed in Italy. 50% of them were coming from sub-Saharan Africa. In this context, the energy sector may or can play a key role if it keeps investing and if its investments actually affect the country by providing energy, hence industrial development, to local markets. What do we mean by this? Investing is not enough. We've always been investing. It is important to invest so that the primary product, gas of oil, may create development and in the country itself. Therefore, economies should create development and end or interrupt the crisis. And this may also lead to cooperation between countries. The drop in investments led to a drop in development, and the gap between North and South has widened, leading, of course, to an increase of migration. If we don't start investing, these inequalities and this gap will further widen, and that's more or less what the ambassador said earlier. However, whoever deals with energy, together with the institutions, should act so as to narrow this gap, which is a development gap. This is a period characterized by low prices, and we, as Eni, have continued to invest to supply gas to local markets, and therefore to allow the countries where we work to grow. This happened in Africa, and in particular in North Africa. This was the start of a long path towards growth, which started in 1954 when we signed our first contract with Egypt. And still now, this is an essential area for Eni. We produce more or less 45% of all our gas and oil. We're in 70 countries, but in the Mediterranean, we produce 45% of the whole product. 37% of our reserves lie there, and over 45% of our investments. Since 2014, in spite of the uncertainty that we were describing, the volatility due to geopolitics and to the drop in oil prices, we kept investing in Africa, and in particular in North Africa, where we devoted over 8 million euros to investment so as to keep obtaining energy for the countries hosting us. In Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, we still supply 100% of our production to the domestic product. That's what I was saying earlier. Not only have we invested in these countries and in these difficult years, but all these countries get 100% of the gas that we found. In Libya, all the gas needed by local power plants. And this is a very clear decision, a very clear choice. We decided to give the product to the local market rather than exporting it. And this is a choice, of course, between profit and value, between short-term and long-term. And thanks to the development of Zohr in Egypt, we will explore a field with 250 billion cubic meters of gas. And so gas will be energy independent. In 2015, Egypt started importing gas, spending over $2,000 billion a year. Now, Egypt will be independent and in the long term for 30, 40 years, and they will even be able to export gas. Very often, the Mediterranean is described only as a theater of tensions, wars, and social inequalities. This opportunity that we have during these 3 days is essential to start talking about the potential, the opportunities of these regions, the need to keep investing there in order to find efficient and immediate solutions with the objectives of narrowing the economic and social gap between the North and the South, between the two realities of the same region. Within this context, Europe needs to play a crucial role. Not only does it need to play it, it must play it, and it is in its interest to do it so.
Ora la parola il CEO di Leonardo, Alessandro.
Now, Leonardo CEO, Alessandro Profumo. Mr. President of the Italian Republic, Mr. President of Lebanon, ambassadors, authorities, ladies and gentlemen. The Mediterranean Dialogue Initiative was a very interesting initiative which repeats itself every fall for other countries of the Mediterranean. And this is particularly true for Italy, which plays its natural role as a host and a promoter. Actually, Italy has been playing a crucial role in the Mediterranean for a long time. And from many points of view, historical, because it's called Mare Nostrum; geographic, because we're physically at the center of the Mediterranean; political, because we have many responsibilities owing to the two previous historical reasons; and economic, because the Mediterranean is an important crossroads for trade, which unites countries of 3 continents, and Italy plays a very important role there. We are the 4th exporter in the Med area after US, Germany, and China, and 10% of Italian export goes to the Mediterranean and the Gulf. We have been experiencing difficult times in this particular region, but it is very good to see that the Mediterranean dialogue is a consistent appointment whereby our contacts were kept alive and whereby the elements which unite us are stressed. And it is very good for us to be part of this debate. Economic growth, technological development, professional training, these are essential elements to overcome many of the difficulties which affect the countries of the Mediterranean. And as Claudio DESCALZI was saying, industry may play a very important role and make a valuable contribution. One of the hottest topics in the Mediterranean is security. The contribution of the Italian industry in this area is manifold, but there are 2 things I'd like to stress in particular. First of all, as far as Europe is concerned, we supply the tools to handle migration flows in an efficient way and to keep security and safety standards high concerning North Africa and Med countries areas, and the Med area, improving the domestic safety standards. Leonardo supplied the governments of many of these countries with platforms and systems to improve their ability to control their land, air traffic control, security, and defense. This cooperation is important not just in view of the operational endowment of these countries. This is important because it favors their industrial, employment, and technological growth through cooperation with local businesses. Leonardo has always been following this approach based on cooperation. We think that high-tech industries in an industrialized country such as Italy should and must contribute to the development of these countries and to help them keep their inhabitants safe. Thank you.
I spoke before about the intentions behind MED, and I mentioned the political will of the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Italy. I now give the floor to the Foreign Affairs Minister, Angelino Alfano.
Buongiorno, signor.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Mr. Mattarella, Mr. President AOUN. It is a great privilege having you here amongst us today, and I thank you for taking part. Ministers from the entire Mediterranean area, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, we are here for the third year to talk about the Mediterranean. What is the Mediterranean today? If you close your eyes, or if you look at these images, look at the planisphere or close your eyes and imagine it, you realize that as compared to the enormous oceans, the Mediterranean looks like a small lake. And yet, once again, here in this lake are the destinies of the world decided in terms of security, stability, respect of human rights. What is the Mediterranean today? The Mediterranean is 1% of the Earth's globe. 10% of the world GDP. The Mediterranean is 500 million potential consumers. The Mediterranean is 20% of sea traffic, 20% of trade traffic. It represents a growth of 4% yearly over the past few years, and it is a crucial point for the destiny of the world. That is what the Mediterranean is today. These data remind us of two concepts. The Mediterranean, at this point in history, represents the risks and the opportunities before us. At the moment, we can say that in the Mediterranean, we still have the shedding of blood in Syria, and we're worried about the future of Libya. There are new tensions in very important regions. There are new challenges to the situation of security in Iraq. There is a fragile stability in the Western Balkans. So we must speak more and more amongst ourselves. We must increase dialogue within the Mediterranean. This is the strategic choice made by Italy, and this is why we decided to make this Med dialogue intuition of my predecessor, Paolo Gentiloni. It is a choice that is determined and rooted in Italian history, in our geographical position at the center of the Mediterranean. It is what has led our approach to dialogue and mediation. Just look, Mediterranean, mediation. They have the same etymological route, and they reflect our and your vocation, our and your diplomatic choices. We are faced with a serious crisis in the Mediterranean. Italy has always followed the route of constructive dialogue. We have never lost our values. We have never made any concessions to the rhetoric of fear, of easy demagogy, of propaganda based on hatred for what is different. We've always believed in a patient diplomatic work aimed at strengthening the cultural and spiritual identity that the various people of the Mediterranean share. I'm thinking above all of the migration crisis that Italy has and is directly involved in, where Italy has brought together solidarity and security by saving thousands of lives in the Mediterranean and keeping our country, our sea, as a place of security, showing that that solidarity and security can go hand in hand. We are appalled when we see a boat packed with hundreds of people going down in the Mediterranean, drowning the lives and the dreams of desperate persons. We are deeply upset when we see the conditions of certain detention centers where refugees are kept. But to all those who for so long have acted in a paternalistic manner, we say, roll up your sleeves, be brave, and supply concrete and immediate aid like Italy has done by fostering an agreement between the UNHCR, Filippo Grandi is present here, and the Presidential Council of Libya. Italy cannot alone take on responsibility for controlling the entire central Mediterranean route, all the more so because this route could create serious risks to European security if used by foreign fighters returning from Iraq and Syria. So we must act together and make sure that we don't have a repetition of the vile terrorist attacks on the mosque in Egypt and others. We must all act together with a medium-long-term approach. And I quote, we should do as Falcone said about the mafia. He said, I would say, terrorism is a human phenomenon. And like all human phenomena, it has a beginning, an evolution, and it will have an end. It is up to us to accelerate its end. We must continue to contribute to the global coalition against Daesh after the successes in Iraq and in Syria. Italy has played its part here too. We are the second country of the coalition in Iraq, and I thank the minister and Ms. Pinotti for their work. That's not enough. We must realize that the shores of the Mediterranean, even though they are geographically very close, are still politically too far from each other. We need to build a genuine partnership between the north and the southern shores of the Mediterranean, a partnership based on an investment, a strategic investment in our youth. This is why we want to act on two fronts. On the one hand, thanks to economic diplomacy, we are promoting new entrepreneurial activities that will create jobs. On the other hand, we are intensifying cultural and university exchanges. And it is a pleasure for me to announce here that during the Med Dialogues, we will be signing an entente to promote a broad Erasmus of the Mediterranean that Italy will support with grants and with a greater university mobility. I belong to the generation of those European youngsters who, during our university years, met Erasmus students from other countries, and that has helped to create the new European generations. I think this is the right path to create a Mediterranean identity and bring our peoples closer and closer together. I am convinced that the keystone is a broad investment in culture. And Italy has already launched an ambitious program called Italy Cultures and the Mediterranean, with 500 cultural initiatives in 2018 from Morocco to Iran. I hope that the Med dialogues will not end up with the usual short-lived slogans that last the time of a tweet. I would like our debates to produce a solid, strong, and long-sighted message. That is, that crises, even the most complex, can be resolved through dialogue, through mediation, and through political solutions. There are no magic recipes. On the contrary, the efforts and our difficult mediations are contrasted and fought against by wizards' apprentices that turn out to be unrealistic, or even magic Pied Pipers who turn out to be prophets of doom. Their military shortcuts deceive the people and lead them to self-destruction. This is the case of Libya. I am sure the Libyans will take the opportunity of the action plan of the UN, because otherwise they, but we all, will pay the consequences. And the tragic history of Syria, too, should be a warning for Libyans and for us all. Regional tensions and brutal actions of the Assad regime have complicated the path to peace for too much time. Our main objective is and will be to support the political process guided by the UN. There cannot be peace and security if we are lacking not only dialogue, but also respect for identities, cultural and historic specificities. We must all together increase our efforts with a strategic aim. That is to separate those who pray from those who shoot. We must isolate those who preach hatred and violence. We must prevent them from poisoning our lives. It is tolerance and inclusiveness that we must promote. We cannot promote an inclusive Mediterranean, however, if half our societies is still not taking part in the decision-making. And this is why last month here in Rome, we created the network of mediating women in the Mediterranean. We support actions that promote gender equality, and we welcome the brave decisions of the Tunisian president. And we organized a special forum on women during these Med dialogues. Gender equality is an investment in growth. The equal participation of women in the economy on an equal footing can give an enormous impetus to the market, that of the Mediterranean. At this moment in time, we are moving on a delicate but decisive path. The Mediterranean must go back to being a meeting point of cultures, of civilizations. Otherwise, it will degenerate into a region of clashes, of terror, of despair, social despair, and unrest. It is up to us, the leaders of the Mediterranean, to make sure that the latter and not the second of these hypotheses come true. The dividends of peace and security in a region that links Europe, Africa, and Asia would be enormous and global for us and the future generations. This is what has brought us here together today. This is the duty we have and the hope that we keep. Thank you.
Signore e signori, adesso è mio piacere.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure, my privilege to give the floor to the President of the Republic of Lebanon, Michel AOUN.
سعادة الرئيس، أيها الحضور الكريم، يعقد هذا المؤتمر تحت
Mr. President, distinguished audience, distinguished guests, this conference is held under the theme Mediterranean Dialogues. We must recognize that the dialogue has become a pressing need, and that is a road to salvation from everything that our world is struggling against today, namely terrorism, which moves about and doesn't stop at any border. That is why I choose to address in my lecture the topic of terrorism, its real root causes and how to tackle them. Terrorism is a systematic violence carried out by armored groups to change a reality, to impose new paradigms, which are often worse than the existing reality. Terrorism is nothing new. The world has known it at different points in time and with different faces. The terrorism which is hitting our world today, it's possibly the most dangerous one, in that it's widespread and it has most advanced weapons. How did it see the light, and how did it spread to the point that it threatens the whole world? In 1979, the Soviets got to Afghanistan. The United States of America, with the support of some Islamic and Arab countries, supported the counter movement against the Soviets based on Islam and Islamic religion, considering that this would run counter the communist thinking and atheism, and this might sort of stop them. The Americans ignored that Islam, despite being against the communist doctrine, was not a Western thinking, but rather had its own character, which is different from both. With the passing of time, the Afghani jihadists, which were supported with money and arms, turned into a terrorist organization, which has manipulated the notion of jihad and attracted young Muslims from the four corners of the world, giving rise to the Al-Qaeda organization. It's Al-Qaeda which perpetrated the attacks in New York on 9/11, 2001. So the terror machine turned against its creator, which in turn decided to destroy such a machine. There was a sort of an earthquake which shook the U.S. Well, there was a new war in Afghanistan, which then spilled over to Iraq, leaving behind destruction, death, and hatred in both countries. There was a constant military pressure on al-Qaeda, and it led to its dismantling. but it gave rise to new dogmatic trends and movements and new terrorist organizations which began to grow and spread further. In 2005, we saw that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi appeared in Iraq, and he accused the Shia of infidelity, takfir. The notion of takfir for Islamists means the duty to fight and kill. And we have seen what followed in the wake of this doctrine. This is the scheme that was designed for the region. And let me state that very clearly. There is a new form of terror which is now being created to destroy other battlefields. We hear people talking about the new Middle East, creative chaos. We've seen the new Arab Spring, with them the Arab countries which began to sort of be destroyed by this, from Tunisia to Libya, to Egypt, to Syria, along with some African countries. Your Excellency, distinguished guest, I have clearly warned against being swept along the Sunni-Shiite war and the disaster that it could bring it into our region. And I have advised the European ambassadors and all the Western politicians who have called on me that what was being prepared for the East, if it were to succeed, not only would it cause tremendous damage, but it would also have great repercussions on Europe. There won't be any boundaries that will separate us because we have the Mediterranean, which we all share. Nevertheless, the scheme was beyond any possible warning, and here we see that the entire Middle East is affected by the burden of this. And we see terrorism moving from one country to another in Europe. I warned many times about the growing takfiri fundamentalism, the danger it carries with it, and the danger for the Mediterranean region. Lebanon is a meeting point between Europe and the East. In 1989, I spoke with the French President François Mitterrand, and I explained that the confrontation between the West and the extremist takfir will be one of the major challenges of the end of the 21st century. The Lebanon, which they're trying to attack, is the land of dialogue between Muslims and Christians, a land of culture and a lifestyle which makes us different from other countries in the world. In an interview to a newspaper in the Gulf countries in 1994, I warned that fundamentalists represented the main threat to Islam. And if they were to come to power in Islamic countries, that would be extremely dangerous. In 1995, I launched a message to world leaders. We had witnessed many terror attacks in Bosnia, in Algeria, and even in Paris. At that time, I did write, these are very dangerous signals of a conflict threatening our future, which cannot be avoided by nuclear deterrence or conventional wars. No one is spared by violence, which is generated by racial and fundamentalist feelings. And these crimes, which were nurtured in the laboratories of political realism, will infect those who let them grow. However, our warnings fell on deaf ears. It's true that there are many persons that are affected by terrorists, but there are others that take advantage of it. Well, there are certainly countries that sponsor terrorism. It's not born spontaneously. There are many factors which pave the way for the emergence of terrorism. First of all, the oppressive regimes, be it a false democracy or a declared dictatorship, where citizens have no free expressions and have no democratic means to change the conditions of power, coupled with poverty, need, and ignorance, and extremist thinking and fanaticism, which stimulates instincts, kills reason, paralyzes logical thinking, and offers wrong solutions. There are many countries that take advantage of this and support a new form of terrorism, which takes up new names, and use this terrorism to pursue their own interest, attacking a number of countries, their economies, and their stability. This is the typical paradigm for the creation of terror organizations. I must say that this destructive machine may get out of control and start strike at random. This is exactly what happened with the current terrorism that we witness. It started by attacking some Arab countries, which were swept by the so-called Arab Spring, but it soon became broader in its scope and moved to Europe and affected Paris, London, Brussels, Madrid, Nice, Munich, and also the United States and other countries. Today, this danger is very serious, and the threat is a serious threat between sleeping cells, and no one knows where and how it can strike. Mr. President, distinguished audience, the world should not remain hostage of fatal extremism. We must find a proper solution to face up to the current situation. And then we have to think in terms of a radical solution to ensure that this is not going to happen again in the future. Now, if the current solution, immediate solution that we need requires a specific action which is based on force to repel terrorism, the radical solution is more important because it does prevent terrorists from strike again. So we have to sort of think in terms of the root causes of terrorism, that is the ideology underlying terrorism, while it justifies the killing of others and demands that others be killed. So we have to strengthen the democratic values which have respect for the human beings, quite apart from religious beliefs, that have respect for the human beings and that can live free. And this is the only thing which allows human beings to face up to this ideology. We must try and educate the future generations. We have to think in terms of finding solutions to poverty, to fight poverty, create a situation which is more conducive to a better position of women. We have to make sure that poorer countries can sort of overcome their backwardness, because we want to sort of go towards authentic democracy. As we are talking about Mediterranean dialogues, I see that the Mediterranean is at the heart, at the center of 3 continents. And it is a region which brings together different cultures, different regions, and has a rich inheritance of cultures, civilizations of ancient peoples and modern peoples. The Mediterranean then can be an area which is a privileged area for a dialogue between culture and religion. Lebanon, by its very nature, it's a plural society which brings together Christians and Muslims. There are, in their respective confessions, there are different churches. They live together and they share the life, the political life and the social life. There are some political differences as well, but they are part of the policy approach, and there is a national unity in the country. His Holiness Pope John Paul II said that Lebanon is more than a country. It is a message. And it is this message in particular that encouraged me to address the United Nations and propose that Lebanon should be turned into a permanent center for dialogue between the various civilizations, religions, and races, to train educators who uphold human values and coexistence. This led me to sort of participate to this conference and address you today. I'm quite confident that the Mediterranean civilization is a common good which brings together all the cultural, historic elements which belong to our countries. We must strengthen the dialogue between the various religions to put an end to the violence and the terrorism. We have to make sure that this initiative of dialogue between religions and cultures must be pursued. And this is an appeal which I'd like to launch here. You've focused on this particular objective today. All the peoples in the world try to pursue this goal, and I'm sure that my plea will be followed by you. Thank you for your attention.